Instructor Kelreth Vastorin's 12 eyes tracked data streams with the patience of an apex predator watching prey approach water. The biometric baseline collection proceeded as designed. Heart rates, stress hormones, brain activity patterns cascading across her displays in familiar rhythms. Ashkari anxiety peaked at 80 beats, a predictable prey flight response. Erlani's stress plateaued at safe thresholds, their logical minds suppressing biological panic with admirable control. Then, the 3 human cadets entered her monitoring web. Ford, Kalen, 22 years old, Mars-born, deceptively relaxed posture that reminded Kelreth of a hunting cat pretending to sleep. His cortisol levels hovered at what would constitute combat readiness for most species, a baseline that should have indicated chronic stress disorder. Yet his movements were fluid, economical. When he spoke, answering her routine questions about prior military experience, his voice carried the controlled cadence of someone perpetually assessing environmental threats. 6 years beltside, crew chief on a nickel iron rig. He paused, jaw working. Lost my team when a support cable snapped. 30 seconds to blowout. Found them floating in the debris field. No elaboration, no emotional inflation, just data, delivered with the same detached tone he might use to report atmospheric pressure readings. Nakamura Yuki, 24, Earthborn, daughter of combat medics. Her amygdala showed constant low-level activation, a state that would drive most beings to nervous breakdown within days, yet she laughed easily, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, and her hands remained steady as she filled out intake forms. When Kelreth inquired about her tactical coordination specialization, those steady hands gestured with unconscious grace.
Swarm robotics. Grew up in field hospitals. You learn to think in 3 dimensions when people are bleeding in 4.
Her humor was sharp, honed, a blade disguised as a smile.
Mom used to say I was born during a mortar attack. First sound I heard was artillery. Second was her telling Dad to keep his damn hands steady while she delivered me.
Hess Jerem, 19 years old, youngest squadron leader in Academy history. From Ganymede, raised beneath Europa's ice. His readings were the strangest. Deliberate respiratory patterns that seemed designed to maintain a specific stress state. Not manage it, maintain it. Pressure's everything where I come from, he said, those 2 bright eyes focused somewhere past Kelreth's shoulder. Home systems failed twice growing up. Ice cracking, seals failing. You learn to think about consequences in layers. What breaks first, what breaks next, what breaks last. His fingers drummed against his thigh in a rhythm that matched the cadence of failing machinery. Makes you appreciate when things are only mostly terrible instead of completely terrible. Kelreth's hunting instinct screamed wrongness. These weren't the stress patterns of prey animals barely holding themselves together. This was something else entirely.
Administrator Goal Theta,
she said later, her secondary eyes still tracking the humans as they left the monitoring bay.
The human baselines require conditioning. Their elevated states will interfere with proper emotional regulation.
The Erlani's probability models flickered behind her optical implants.
Agreed. Schedule them for standard fear response training. We'll condition out those irregularities before they contaminate the cohort.
Neither recognized these readings as warning signs. In Kelreth's species, elevated baselines meant weakness, damaged prey that wouldn't survive the first real hunt. The humans registered as flawed equipment requiring calibration. She was profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. The Crucible's first exercise was elegant in its simplicity. A corridor assault against holographic hostiles designed to establish baseline combat responses. Kelreth observed from her elevated position, her predatory vision parsing movement patterns while biometric displays painted her understanding of the engagement in hard data. The Ashkari cadets performed admirably. Their fear spikes, sharp and brief before training, suppressed panic into manageable focus. The Thun maintained their species' legendary calm, heart rates never varying more than 5 beats per minute. Textbook responses, clean data. Then the humans entered the kill box.
Pressure check,
Hess whispered, his voice carrying the cadence of someone used to speaking in confined spaces. Green across, Ford replied, his mining jargon translating seamlessly to tactical speak.
Vital steady,
Nakamura added, her medic's instincts automatically monitoring the team's status. Ford moved first, his partner Nakamura 3 steps behind and offset, classical battle buddy positioning refined by months of shared survival training. As the first holographic hostile materialized, Ford's heart rate spiked from 70 to 180 beats per minute. Kelreth's hunter brain expected him to freeze, scatter, or fire wildly. Instead, his accuracy improved. Contact left, Ford called, his voice carrying the flat calm of someone who'd learned to function in hard vacuum. Nakamura, you see the Overwatch position?
Already on it,
she replied, her tone mixing professional assessment with dark humor.
Looks like someone's about to have a very bad day.
His reaction time dropped by 30%. Where other species showed degraded performance under stress, the human's targeting reticle locked onto threats without hesitation. But this wasn't robotic. Kelreth could see the micro-adjustments, the fluid compensation for movement and distance. This was enhanced biological processing. Nakamura's fear response synchronized with Ford's within seconds. Not gradually, not through conscious coordination, but like 2 instruments finding the same frequency. Their movements became unconsciously coordinated, Ford advancing while Nakamura provided overwatch, neither needing to communicate their intentions.
Cascade failure in Sector 3,
Hess announced, his submarine city upbringing translating tactical flow into hydraulic metaphors.
Rerouting through the backup corridor.
Hess, functioning as squad leader, did something that violated every military doctrine Kelreth knew. He deliberately hyperventilated, pushing his stress hormones beyond what should have been safe thresholds. His tactical processing accelerated visibly. Kelreth watched him identify firing positions, threat vectors, and exit routes in a span of seconds that should have required minutes of analysis.
Ford, breach and clear. Nakamura, overwatch transitions to close support in 3, 2, execute.
They moved like flowing water, each understanding the other's capabilities instinctively. Ford's mining experience translated into an intuitive grasp of structural weak points. Nakamura's medical background meant she tracked everyone's stress levels and physical conditions simultaneously. Hess's underwater engineering training let him visualize tactical flow in 3 dimensions. They cleared the corridor in half the expected time. Kelreth requested a system diagnostic, certain her equipment had malfunctioned. The readings were accurate. The humans had used terror as fuel.
Explain what happened in there.
Kelreth had separated them for individual interviews, using interrogation techniques her species had refined over millennia of hunting social prey. She started with Ford, the most straightforward of the 3. The human sat across from her, those pale eyes studying her face with the same careful attention she reserved for tracking wounded quarry. The lines around his eyes were etched deeper than his age suggested, as if he carried the memory of G-forces his body had never actually experienced. When he spoke, his words came slowly, carefully measured, the speech pattern of someone who'd learned that wasted words could mean wasted oxygen. Decompression drill, he said finally. Same as the belt. You get maybe 30 seconds before hard vacuum kills you, so you learn to think fast. Real fast. He paused, fingers unconsciously tracing maintenance patterns on the table's surface. When the fear hits, everything slows down, like time dilation near a gravity well, but in your head.
Elaborate.
Ford's jaw worked silently, chewing on words like they cost him air. In the mines, panic kills. But terror keeps you alive. When that support cable snapped and I saw my crew floating, he stopped, reset. Point is, fear makes you see the system failures before they cascade. The exercise was just another system under stress. Kelreth's hunting instincts screamed warning. This wasn't the broken rambling of traumatized prey. This was a technician describing routine maintenance procedures. Nakamura was more articulate, but no less disturbing. She sat with the unconscious poise of someone who'd learned to find calm in chaos, hands folded, breathing deep and even. When she spoke, her voice carried the warm authority of someone used to talking scared people through medical procedures.
You want to know about the sync-up with Ford and Jerem?
She smiled, the expression somehow both gentle and predatory.
Ever worked trauma surgery, instructor? Of course not. You don't have the same biological vulnerabilities we do. But in a field hospital, you learn to read the room like a diagnostic scanner.
She leaned forward, her manner shifting to educational mode.
When someone's about to crash, their vitals change first, then their body language, then they start making bad calls. By the time they're screaming, they've been dying for minutes, so you learn to feel the fear, theirs and yours, and use it like triage data. You used fear as a communication medium? Hell yes!
Nakamura's laugh was soft, musical, but with an edge like surgical steel.
Mom delivered 3 babies during the Phobos Rebellion while orbital bombardment was falling outside. She said the adrenaline made her hands steadier, her mind clearer. Fear's just another vital sign, instructor. Question is whether you let it control you or put it to work.
She gestured at the monitoring equipment around them.
In there, Ford's fear signature told me he was targeting structural weak points. Jerem's breathing pattern said he was running tactical probabilities. My job was to keep them both alive while they did what they do best. Fear just made the data transfer faster.
Hess was the most troubling. At 19, he possessed the kind of systematic calm that took most officers decades to develop. But when Kelreth probed the source of his enhanced performance, his answer carried the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing atmospheric pressure readings.
Pressure differentials,
he said, those 2 bright eyes focusing on something past her shoulder.
Grew up in the sub-cities under Europa's ice. Everything's about pressure. Atmospheric, hydraulic, psychological. You learn to feel it building before the gauges register red.
His fingers drummed that same mechanical rhythm against his thigh.
First habitat failure? I was 7. Woke up to hull breach alarms and my parents screaming at each other about emergency procedures. Took 3 hours to patch the breach. 3 days for rescue. You know what I learned?
Kelreth waited.
Fear's just pressure differential between what is and what might be. You can equalize it by accepting that what might be is probably going to happen anyway.
His smile was winter cold.
In the exercise, I wasn't imagining disaster, I was calculating it. Once you know the failure modes, terror becomes manageable, even useful.
He leaned back, that mechanical rhythm never stopping.
Dad used to say that in the deep cities, you're always 30 seconds from death. Ice shifts, seals fail, pressure drops, but if you accept that dying is the default state, then staying alive becomes a technical problem instead of an emotional one.
Kelreth's secondary eyes, the ones her species used for tracking movement, wouldn't stop focusing on the humans. Every predatory instinct she possessed insisted these creatures were dangerous, but the data suggested they were simply broken. Damaged prey trying to function despite psychological trauma. Her hunter brain and her scientific training were at war. She documented their responses clinically, but part of her mind kept circling back to a fundamental question. What kind of prey weaponizes its own fear response? 3 days later, Instructor Vrex Dahl stormed into Kelreth's laboratory, his scent markers broadcasting territorial aggression. Her colleague was old-school Vothrak military. 2 centuries of proven tactical doctrine wrapped in scarred chitin and barely contained violence.
The humans are contaminating the other cadets.
Kelreth's primary eyes remained focused on her data analysis, but her secondary eyes tracked Vrexdal's agitated pacing.
Explain.
Multi-species exercise, standard urban pacification scenario. The humans' biometrics began affecting nearby squads. Sympathetic stress spikes, elevated heart rates, the full cascade.
The plates of his jaw ground together.
Other species' performance degraded as expected, but teams positioned near the humans showed marginal improvements.
That got Kelreth's attention. She pulled up the exercise recordings, her 12 eyes parsing multiple data streams simultaneously. The pattern was undeniable. Human stress responses were so intense they triggered emergency threat assessments in nearby nervous systems. Other species' bodies interpreted the humans' extreme states as evidence of massive, unseen danger.
It's not telepathy,
She said, more to herself than to Vrex Dahl.
it's biological hijacking. Their fear response is so pronounced it forces hyperfocus in surrounding organisms.
It's unnatural.
Vrex Dahl's scent markers shifted to disgust.
They should be isolated from the general population.
But Kelreth was already designing new parameters for testing. If human fear response could enhance other species' performance through proximity alone, what were the tactical implications? She authorized paired training exercises. Humans partnered with different species in two-person fire teams. The results violated everything she understood about pack dynamics. Ashkari, paired with humans, reported feeling hunted throughout the exercises, a state of constant alertness that should have been exhausting. Instead, their performance improved by 15%. They moved with enhanced coordination, anticipated threats more effectively, and maintained tactical awareness far beyond their normal capabilities. Thune described experiencing an alien sharpness to their thoughts when working alongside humans. Their legendary calm remained intact, but underlying it was a new edge, a predatory focus that felt borrowed from another species entirely. Most unsettling were the pairs themselves. Despite having no prior experience working together, human-alien teams began moving in unconscious synchronization. Not the hierarchical coordination of traditional pack structures, but something more organic. The humans' fear response seemed to forge temporary bonds that transcended species barriers. Gol Theta reviewed the data with her typical analytical detachment, probability models cascading behind her optical implants as she processed the implications.
Recommendation: expand testing parameters. If human fear responses can be weaponized for tactical advantage, we need to understand the mechanisms involved.
Kelreth's hunting instincts screamed that they were missing something fundamental, but her scientific curiosity overrode caution. She authorized escalated tests. She would later recognize this as the moment they lost control of the situation. The disaster response simulation was designed to break untrained minds, a reactor breach scenario requiring rapid, complex problem-solving under extreme pressure, the kind of crisis that separated competent officers from corpses. Standard military doctrine called for fear suppression in such situations. Panic killed more people than radiation. The human squad did something that made Kelreth's hunter brain recoil in atavistic horror. They deliberately terrified themselves. Ford's biometrics spiked as he recalled his crew's decompression in vivid detail. Kelreth could track the memory's progression through his stress hormones as he relived finding their frozen bodies. Nakamura visualized radiation poisoning cases from her childhood, systematically inducing cellular-level dread. Hess imagined Ganymede's habitat failing like his childhood home, visualizing 12,000 people dying in hard vacuum. Their stress responses should have caused complete cognitive collapse. Instead, Kelreth watched their problem-solving accelerate beyond what she'd believed biologically possible. They processed 16 different solutions simultaneously, their shared terror forging them into a single, distributed consciousness. Individual humans became nodes in a single thinking system, fear serving as both fuel and transmission medium. The cadence of their breathing and the subharmonic frequencies in their clipped, overlapping speech seemed to carry data faster than words alone.
They solved the scenario in 1/3 the expected time, implementing solutions the exercise designers hadn't considered. When the simulation ended, they emerged not exhausted, but energized, pupils dilated, movements sharp and coordinated, speaking in overlapping fragments that somehow formed coherent tactical assessments. Rex Dahl filed a formal complaint, calling it cheating, but Kelreth understood they'd witnessed something unprecedented. The humans hadn't fought through fear or overcome it. They'd fed on it like predators consuming prey. She spent hours reviewing the recordings, her 12 eyes tracking biometric cascades while her mind struggled to process the implications. These creatures didn't just tolerate fear. They had evolved to metabolize it into enhanced cognitive function. What kind of evolutionary pressure created such a response? The human military history files made for disturbing reading. Kelreth accessed them through academic channels, ostensibly researching comparative tactical doctrine. What she found challenged every assumption about fear, survival, and combat effectiveness. Battle after battle, where human forces, faced with overwhelming odds, didn't break, but transformed. Thermopylae, 300 warriors holding a mountain pass against hundreds of thousands. Fear-induced adrenaline turning desperate defense into tactical legend. Stalingrad, civilians and soldiers becoming a single organism of resistance, shared terror creating unbreakable cohesion. The siege of Ganymede, outnumbered colonists using environmental panic to achieve tactical miracles. The pattern was consistent across millennia. As situations worsened, human effectiveness increased. Fear didn't degrade their cohesion, it created it. References to berserker states, battle fury, combat flow, dozens of terms for the same phenomenon. Humans had known about their relationship with fear for thousands of years, but never understood the biological mechanisms. Most disturbing were their training methods. Deliberate exposure to terror, controlled panic induction, something called stress inoculation. They had been systematically teaching themselves to weaponize fear. Kelreth presented her preliminary findings during a standard debrief, using clinical terminology to describe what she'd observed. Fear synchronization, stress hormone optimization, terror-based tactical enhancement. She watched something change in the human's eyes as she spoke, especially Hess's. His too bright gaze sharpened with recognition. She had given them the language for what they'd always felt. Within days, she observed them experimenting. They began sharing specific fears before exercises, testing which memories produced optimal stress responses. Ford discovered that visualizing his crew's deaths enhanced his tactical processing more than generic danger scenarios. Nakamura found that imagining specific patients from her childhood, children dying despite her parents' efforts, created the perfect mixture of protective rage and clinical focus. Hess cataloged fear types like a scholar studying literature. Anticipatory dread for reconnaissance missions, explosive panic for assault scenarios, slow-burning terror for endurance operations. He assigned specific fears to each squad member based on their roles and psychological profiles. The feedback loop horrified Kelreth. She studied them, they learned from her studies, then manifested something even more terrifying for her to analyze. The midterm urban warfare exercise pushed human fear weaponization to new levels. A complex scenario requiring squads to clear a contested cityscape while protecting civilians, the kind of multi-layered operation that challenged even veteran units. Kelreth watched the human squad prepare with the focused attention of a predator studying new hunting behavior. Their pre-combat rituals had evolved from her clinical observations into something approaching military sacrament. "All right, pressure check," Hess said, his voice carrying the ritualistic calm of someone conducting pre-dive safety procedures. "Ford, what's your fear load?" Ford's response was delivered like a damage report. "Structural collapse, crew safety, equipment failure under stress." His mining background showed in every word, dangers cataloged like maintenance items. "Running the Titan Station disaster on loop. 29 dead because someone trusted faulty support cables." "Good load. Nakamura?"
"Patient loss, cascade trauma, insufficient resources."
She spoke like she was reviewing medical charts, but her eyes carried the weight of every face she'd failed to save.
"Cycling through the Mariner Valley Field Hospital. 43 casualties, 6 surgical bays, and me trying to decide who lives and who doesn't."
Hess nodded with the satisfaction of an engineer reviewing system specifications. "Perfect. I'm carrying habitat failure, pressure loss, and mission cascade breakdown. Everyone understands their fear assignments?" Ford cracked his knuckles, a sound like metal settling under stress. "We're really doing this, making terror into tactical advantage."
"Been doing it our whole lives,"
Nakamura pointed out, her medic's pragmatism cutting through any philosophical hesitation.
"Now we just have a name for it."
Hess began the breathing sequence he'd developed, not the slow, calming patterns taught to other species, but sharp, hyperventilation bursts designed to spike adrenaline at precise intervals. Kelreth noted that the rhythm of his finger tapping against his thigh was no longer random. It was a complex pattern, almost a language of its own. "Remember, fear is pressure differential. We equalize by accepting the worst case and planning past it." Ford joined the sequence, his movements certain, without wasted motion. "In the belt, you're always 30 seconds from vacuum. Makes you appreciate when things are only catastrophic instead of completely fucked."
"Language,"
Nakamura chided, but she was smiling as she synchronized her breathing with theirs.
"Though you're not wrong. When you grow up watching people die despite your best efforts, merely terrible starts looking pretty good."
Most disturbing was Hess's fear assignment protocol. Based on Kelreth's research into human stress optimization, he designated different terror types for different roles. Nakamura carried fear of civilian casualties for enhanced Overwatch awareness. Ford shouldered fear of structural failure for environmental assessment, while Hess himself bore fear of total mission collapse for strategic oversight. "Ford, you're our early warning system," Hess explained, his submarine city background showing in how he conceptualized team roles as interconnected system components. "Structural fear keeps you scanning for environmental hazards. Nakamura, patient loss fear makes you hypersensitive to friendly casualties. I run mission failure scenarios to predict cascade breakdowns." They had weaponized her science, but Kelreth was beginning to understand they'd always been weapons. Her research had simply given them vocabulary for what came naturally. As they entered the exercise zone, their biometrics locked into perfect synchronization. Through her predatory vision, Kelreth saw something that made her primary hunting instincts recoil. They moved like a pack, but wrong. No alpha hierarchy, no dominance patterns. They flowed like liquid finding cracks, each member knowing where others would be not through learned coordination, but through a shared, high-bandwidth stream of terror-fueled data. "Movement, 2 o'clock," Ford called out, his structural fear load making him hypersensitive to anything that didn't belong in the urban environment.
"Civilian or hostile?"
Nakamura asked, her patient protection instincts automatically calculating threat assessment. "Civilian, but the building's compromised. 3rd floor's about to pancake." Hess processed the information through his mission failure matrix. "Can we extract them?" "Negative, but we can channel the collapse to create a choke point." "Do it," Hess ordered. "Nakamura, civilian evacuation route."
"Already plotted. Secondary exit through the market district."
They worked with the seamless coordination of people who'd been afraid together so long they'd learned to make terror sing a melody. When ambushed, their collective fear response processed threats faster than conscious thought. Kelreth watched them anticipate attacks that hadn't happened yet, their synchronized stress creating a prediction engine that operated beyond individual cognitive limits. They took casualties,
holographic deaths that registered as psychologically real to their nervous systems. Her species would fragment here, pack cohesion breaking under loss. Instead, each death sharpened the survivors further, like metal being forged in flame. The exercise concluded with the highest score in Academy history. Other cadets who observed reported nightmares for weeks. Several Ashkari fled the observation deck mid-exercise, their prey instincts overwhelmed by proximity to something that violated natural order. Kelrath filed her report with hands that trembled despite her predatory control. She was no longer studying broken prey trying to function despite trauma. She was documenting the evolution of fear itself into a weapon. The Academy Board convened an emergency session within the sealed council chambers of Threshold Station. Representatives from 63 species arrayed themselves according to ancient custom, but the familiar rituals felt hollow in the face of what they'd witnessed. Vrex Dahl presented his case for human expulsion, each point a carefully aimed strike, his argument stripped of all but the essential facts.
They represent fundamental contamination of established military doctrine. Their presence creates cascade failures and other species' psychological stability. I recommend immediate removal and quarantine.
Gol Theta's probability models painted the chamber walls with statistical projections, chaos spreading through every scenario involving human integration. Her predictive models broke down when trying to process tactics that required embracing failure as an operational parameter.
The data supports Instructor Vrexdal's assessment,
The Orlani stated.
Human methods introduce unacceptable variables into our predictive frameworks.
But Kelrath had spent weeks analyzing the implications of what they'd observed. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of a predator who'd studied prey that turned out to be something else entirely.
You're asking the wrong question,
she said, her 12 eyes focused on the assembled species.
We've been trying to fix humans because we assumed they were broken. But what if they're not broken? What if they're optimized for a different kind of warfare?
She activated the chamber's holographic displays, showing battle footage from human military history alongside Academy exercise recordings. The pattern was undeniable. Where other species sought to minimize fear's impact on performance, humans had evolved to maximize it.
They're not prey that learned to fight back. They're a species that discovered how to make terror dance.
The debate that followed split along evolutionary lines. Species descended from pack hunters saw opportunity, allies who grew stronger as situations grew desperate. Former prey species saw existential threat, creatures that violated the fundamental assumptions underlying military doctrine. The compromise felt like cowardice to everyone involved. A final examination. The terminus examination. If humans could maintain discipline while facing certain defeat, they could remain. If they broke, they would be expelled. Kelrath knew they were still asking the wrong question. The humans wouldn't maintain discipline in the face of defeat. They would transcend it. Preparation for Terminus revealed new depths of human fear architecture that made Kelrath's scientific mind real. Hess led his squad through increasingly extreme conditioning exercises that pushed their terror responses beyond anything she documented.
Sensory deprivation first,
Hess announced, his voice carrying the systematic calm of someone who'd survived habitat failures through systematic preparation.
We need to expand our fear processing capacity.
Ford settled into the isolation chamber with the resignation of someone who'd floated alone in hard vacuum. How long?
Until you can solve tactical problems while experiencing existential dread,
Hess replied.
Nakamura's record is 53 minutes.
That's because I cheat,
Nakamura said, checking the chamber's medical monitors, her hands moving with an unhurried confidence that spoke of years in trauma wards.
I think about the kids I couldn't save. Makes regular panic feel like background noise.
The psychological residue is a bitch, though.
They practiced with legal stimulants that pushed stress hormones beyond natural limits, not to build resistance, but to expand their capacity to process terror at higher volumes. Ford demonstrated by deliberately triggering a panic attack, then using the induced terror to solve complex tactical equations faster than the Academy's baseline processors. "Equation set 7, he announced, his hands shaking with adrenaline while his mind operated with cold clarity. "Solution: flanking maneuver through the utility tunnels, breach charges at structural weak points, extraction via the maintenance shafts."
Time?
Hess asked. 14 seconds. Nakamura whistled appreciation.
That's faster than the Academy's combat computers.
"Fear makes the processing parallel instead of sequential," Ford explained, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked pale, drained, as if he'd just run a marathon. Calrath noted the telltale signs of a hormonal hangover. His power had a cost. Like running multiple diagnostic routines simultaneously. Nakamura demonstrated her own terror tuning, adjusting her fear response like a medic calibrating surgical instruments.
Protective fear for civilian operations,
she said, her voice shifting to the clinical tones she'd learned in field hospitals.
Failure fear for strategic planning, death fear for desperate gambles.
She cycled through each emotional state, her breathing and posture shifting with a fluid control that was both terrifying and absolute.
The trick is accepting that all the terrible things you're imagining are probably going to happen anyway. Then you can use them as data instead of paralysis.
Most disturbing was their death simulation training. Using meditation techniques and biofeedback equipment, they practiced experiencing the terror of dying without the reality, training their minds to function even in extremity.
Death's just another system failure,
Hess explained. His submarine city upbringing shaped his approach. He treated mortality as an engineering problem.
You can't prevent it, but you can optimize your response to it.
Calrath watched a 19-year-old boy flatline his vital signs while maintaining tactical awareness. His fear of death so perfectly controlled it to become a computational tool. When he emerged from the simulation, his eyes carried the hollow certainty of someone who'd looked into the abyss and found it useful. "How do you do it?" Ford asked after his own death simulation session. "How do you make dying feel functional?" Hess's smile was winter cold.
Same way you made vacuum feel normal. You accept that it's the default state and work backwards from there.
Their bond had deepened beyond mere squad cohesion into something resembling family, the kind of family forged in shared trauma and mutual dependence. They finished each other's tactical assessments, anticipated each other's fears, and used their combined terror as a 3-part counterpoint.
You realize we're probably broken,
Nakamura said one evening as they ran through their fear cycling exercises. "No," Ford replied, his mining pragmatism cutting through any self-pity. "We're optimized. There's a difference."
Optimized for what?
she asked. Hess answered with the certainty of someone who'd spent his life calculating system failures.
For surviving what other people can't imagine.
Other instructors observed with mixtures of awe and revulsion. Vrex Dahl warned repeatedly that this would end in catastrophe. Calrath found herself hoping he was wrong, while knowing he may be right. The humans were evolving in real time, fear serving as both pressure and catalyst. They weren't preparing for an examination, they were becoming something new. The Terminus exam began at 0800 hours with elegant mathematical hopelessness. Defend a civilian colony against exponentially increasing enemy forces with dwindling resources. No reinforcements, no escape routes, no victory conditions. Just the question of how long dignity could survive contact with inevitability.
Final pressure check,
Hess said, his voice carrying the ritual calm of pre-dive routines one last time. Structural collapse, crew loss, equipment failure, Ford replied, his mining background evident in how he cataloged approaching disaster. Running full disaster scenarios. I'm ready.
Patient loss, cascade trauma, resource exhaustion.
Nakamura added, her medic's training translating into protective fear that would keep her hypervigilant for casualties.
Cycling through Mariner Valley, Titan Station, and New Singapore. All green. Habitat failure, mission collapse, total system breakdown.
Hess's submarine city upbringing showed in how he conceptualized the defense as a pressure vessel under stress.
Accepting default failure state, operating from worst-case baseline.
Kelreth watched from the sealed observation deck as human stress hormones redlined immediately. But instead of panic, she witnessed transformation. The squad didn't synchronize, they merged at some fundamental level that her instruments could barely track. Ford became their tactical processing core, his mining experience translating into prescient awareness of structural vulnerabilities. Sector 7's load-bearing wall is compromised, he called out as enemy fire weakened the colony's defensive positions. Control collapse in 3 minutes. We can channel their advance into the choke point. His fear of equipment failure translated into supernatural maintenance awareness. He anticipated system breakdowns minutes before they occurred, jury-rigging solutions with the desperate resourcefulness of someone who'd kept life support running with spare parts and prayer. Nakamura transformed into their coordination nexus, her medic background allowing her to track everyone's physical and psychological status simultaneously.
Ford's running at 90% capacity. Mild dehydration, elevated but stable stress markers,
she reported while simultaneously coordinating defensive fire and civilian evacuation.
Hess is pushing his fear processing into redline territory, but cognitive function remains optimal.
Her terror of losing patients created a protective field that somehow made nearby defenders more effective. She anticipated injuries before they happened, calculated medical resource allocation while directing tactical maneuvers. Hess channeled their collective fear into strategic time dilation, making command decisions with prescient accuracy. His childhood terror of habitat failure let him see cascade effects in enemy tactics, predicting how small actions would compound into major vulnerabilities.
Enemy formation spreading to avoid the choke point,
he announced, his voice carrying the mechanical certainty of someone calculating pressure dynamics.
But that leaves their flanks exposed. Ford, can you bring down the northeast tower?
Give me 30 seconds and something that explodes.
Nakamura, civilian evacuation status? 80% clear. Medical base running on emergency power, but we can maintain life support for another 40 minutes.
They held the first wave, then the second. By the 7th wave, they should have been combat ineffective. Instead, their performance continued increasing. You know what's funny? Ford said during a brief lull, his voice carrying the dark humor of someone who'd learned to joke in the face of vacuum. This is exactly like that time our mining platform got hit by debris, except now I've got backup.
Backup and better company,
Nakamura added, her medic's pragmatism tinged with genuine affection.
Though the medical facilities are about the same quality.
Could be worse,
Hess observed, his submarine city perspective making their desperate situation seem merely challenging.
At least the atmosphere's staying put.
They weren't fighting anymore. They were conducting a symphony of violence with terror as their metronome, 3 voices singing a counterpoint in the key of controlled catastrophe. Hour 3 brought the first impossible moment. Facing complete encirclement by forces outnumbering them 50-1, the humans did something that broke Vorthak understanding of pack tactics. They split their forces. Not from panic, with deliberate purpose. Each separated unit maintained the same synchronized fear response despite physical isolation, as if yoked by a single shared will. Kelreth's sensors struggled to interpret the data stream. It wasn't telepathy, it was learned. Subvocal clicks, precisely modulated breathing patterns, even the timing of their weapons fire formed a high-bandwidth language of pure terror. They were encoding complex data, enemy positions, ammunition states, tactical intentions in the very biological signals other species fought to suppress.
The enemy AI, programmed with 60,000 years of military doctrine from every known species, couldn't adapt to opponents who grew stronger under pressure. It increased threat levels, expecting broken morale and tactical collapse. Instead, it fueled human performance escalation. By hour 5, the humans had turned the colony into a maze of death, using their intimate knowledge of fear to predict exactly how enemies would react to various stimuli. They weren't defending anymore, they were hunting. Goal Theta's probability models began erroring out, unable to process tactics that required embracing catastrophic failure as an operational foundation. Hour 8 witnessed something unprecedented in recorded military history. With 73% casualties and critical ammunition shortages, the human survivors should have entered psychological collapse. Medical doctrine from every known species agreed. This level of stress and loss inevitably led to catatonic breakdown. Instead, Kelreth observed a phase transition in their neurochemistry.
System status!
Hess called out, his voice carrying the same mechanical calm he'd used to report pressure readings in a failing habitat.
Ammunition critical, structural integrity at 30%, life support running on emergency reserves,
Ford replied, his mining engineer background showing in how he assessed their deteriorating situation as routine equipment failure.
The primary supports are still solid. We can work with this.
Medical assessment?
14 wounded, 6 critical, 3 that won't make it without immediate evacuation,
Nakamura reported, her field medic training letting her triage casualties while directing defensive fire.
But the ones still fighting are running on pure terror-enhanced adrenaline. They'll hold until they physically can't.
Ford's cortisol levels exceeded fatal thresholds for every known species, but his brain activity showed pattern recognition accelerating beyond baseline biological limits. The fear signal had become so absolute, it was no longer noise. It was a carrier wave for pure tactical data.
Incoming ordnance, bearing 270,
he announced, his structural failure fears translating into prescient environmental awareness.
Penetration depth suggests they're trying to bring down the main support column.
Counter battery fire?
Negative, but I can rig a systematic collapse that'll take out their forward observers.
Nakamura's biometrics showed her amygdala in constant activation, but instead of paralysis, she processed multiple probability threads simultaneously. Her terror of losing her remaining squadmates had become computational substrate. She calculated enemy movements, friendly positions, and tactical opportunities faster than conscious thought.
Ford, if you bring down that column, it'll block our primary evacuation route,
she pointed out, her medical training making her hypersensitive to casualty implications.
Already factored. Secondary route through the maintenance tunnel stays clear.
What about the civilians in Section 4?
They've got maybe 10 minutes before the collapse reaches them. Can you get them out?
I can try.
Her voice carried the grim determination of someone who'd spent her childhood watching their parents perform medical miracles under impossible conditions.
But I'll need covering fire.
Hess's readings defied classification.
His stress response had transcended individual biology, becoming something collective and distributed. He existed in multiple temporal states simultaneously, past regrets, present dangers, and future consequences flowing together into tactical prescience.
Do it,
he ordered, his submarine city background letting him visualize the colony's structure like a three-dimensional pressure vessel.
Ford, initiate controlled collapse in 60 seconds. Nakamura, begin civilian evacuation. I'll coordinate covering fire and manage the retreat.
Their shared terror had become an overclocked consciousness, using fear as coolant for cognition that should have burned out synaptic pathways.
But more than that, their individual personalities had sharpened under pressure into perfect tactical tools.
Ford's engineering pragmatism, Nakamura's protective instincts, Hess's systems thinking leadership. Other observing cadets reported physical symptoms: nausea, vertigo, the inexplicable feeling of being stalked by something ancient and patient. Several Ashkari fled the observation deck, their hindbrains convinced an apex predator was present, despite their eyes showing only 3 wounded humans in a training scenario. Vrex Stahl demanded the immediate termination of the exercise. Goal Theta overrode his objections, her probability model struggling to process something that used catastrophic failure as an operating system.
The climax arrived at hour 12, with orbital bombardment and ground assault forces outnumbering the survivors 10,000 to 1. In any rational universe, this meant instant annihilation. But the humans had passed beyond rationality into something else entirely.
Final pressure check,
Hess said, his voice carrying the same ritual calm they had used for months of preparation. All systems failing, Ford replied, his mining engineer's assessment tinged with dark humor. Structural integrity negative, ammunition exhausted, life support compromised. Standard Tuesday, really.
Patient status critical across the board,
Nakamura added, her medics training making her hyper-aware of everyone's deteriorating condition.
but we're still breathing, which means we're still fighting.
Good enough, Hess said, his submarine city background showing in how he treated their impossible situation as merely another pressure emergency. Let's make it count. Their synchronized fear response created cascading errors in Kel-Reth's biometric sensors, readings that displayed as mathematical impossibilities. They existed in accelerated time, their perception so heightened that seconds stretched into tactical eternities. Ford rigged improvised explosives for materials that should have been inert. Mixing medical supplies with power cell components, he announced, his voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone who jury-rigged life support systems in hard vacuum. The reaction is inherently unstable, suicidal by any engineering standard, but fear lets you see the tiny window where it works. Nakamura coordinated their movements with prescient accuracy, her fear of loss creating probability maps that predicted enemy actions minutes in advance.
Incoming artillery strike, 51 seconds. Sniper team advancing on the eastern approach, 2 minutes. Assault force breaching the southern perimeter in 90 seconds.
How can you possibly know that? Ford asked, even as he began moving to counter the predicted sniper position.
Same way you know that jury-rigged explosive is going to work,
she replied, her medic's instincts transformed into tactical prophecy.
Fear makes patterns visible.
Hess, despite critical wounds that should have rendered him unconscious, directed their final stands with supernatural timing. His childhood terror of systematic failure let him see the perfect moments to spring traps, fall back, or strike at structural weak points in enemy formations. As he did, something stirred in Kel-Reth. A deep, atavistic part of her hunter brain resonated with their unified purpose. For a fleeting instant, she felt an involuntary, primal urge to join their hunt, to feel the sharp thrill of their synchronized, impossible stand. She suppressed it with scientific discipline, shaken.
Ford, breach the eastern wall in 30 seconds. Nakamura covering fire on the southern approach. I'll handle the artillery.
With what? Ford demanded, his pragmatic mind still functioning despite the impossibility of their situation.
With 20 years of surviving system failures,
Hess replied, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who'd learned to find hope in the mathematics of disaster.
Sometimes the best way to stop a cascade is to cascade faster.
Survival was never an option. The cold logic of the situation was absolute, but they endured for another 2 hours, turning certain death into a masterwork of tactical evolution, their individual voices weaving together into something that transcended their individual limitations. When the last human finally fell, they had eliminated a statistically staggering number of enemies and created tactical innovations that would require years to properly analyze. More importantly, they had proven that 3 broken people could become something greater than the sum of their fears. The air crackled, charged with the after-effect of the simulation's end. The aftermath reshaped everything. Kel-Reth presented her final report to a packed auditorium, every senior instructor and administrator in attendance. The chamber's atmosphere processing struggled with the scent markers of 63 species expressing variations of awe, terror, and fascination.
Fear,
she began, her 12 eyes focusing on different sections of the audience,
is not meant to be conquered, suppressed, or eliminated. For humanity, fear is fuel, its language, its evolution in real time.
She showed recordings of human military units throughout history, demonstrating the pattern that had taken her months to recognize. When faced with extinction, Humans didn't break, they became. The presentations included biometric data from Terminus, showing how the humans cadets had achieved conscious control over their own evolutionary responses.
They turned the galaxy's most primal weakness into the greatest strength through millions of years of evolutionary pressure. What we witnessed was not broken prey trying to function despite trauma. We observed the birth of a new form of warfare.
The room was still. Some species saw opportunity, allies who grew stronger when situations grew worse. Others saw existential threat, a species that violated fundamental assumptions about fear, courage, and survival. The Ashkari delegation walked out midway through the presentation. The Thun requested immediate isolation measures, but the Vorthak, despite Vrex Dahl's objections, voted for integration.
If we're going to hunt alongside these creatures,
the senior Vorthak commander said,
we need to understand their weapons.
3 months later, the Stellar Defense Academy published new curriculum guidelines. Integrated human-alien units became standard, with carefully managed procedures for fear synchronization effects. Kelreth found herself leading the new Department of Stress Response Warfare, teaching other species how to work alongside humanity's terrifying gift. Not everyone adapted. Several species withdrew from the program entirely, unable to reconcile human methods with their psychology. But those who remained discovered something profound. Humans didn't just bring their own fear to battle. They taught others how to transform terror into strength. Kelreth observed a new mixed-species unit in the Crucible. A young Vorthak cadet, paired with a human instructor, faced a scenario designed to induce paralyzing dread. As her stress hormones spiked, she didn't suppress them according to traditional doctrine. She rode them. Using techniques borrowed from the humans, she let her predator's fear become fuel for enhanced awareness. Her hunting instincts sharpened rather than scattered. Her tactical processing accelerated instead of fragmenting. Kelreth allowed herself a predator's smile. All 12 eyes focused on the biometric displays. She understood now what she'd been seeing all along. Humans weren't prey that learned to fight back. They weren't predators who learned to harness fear. They were something entirely new, the perfect synthesis of hunter and hunted. They were prey that became the ultimate predator by perfecting the art of being afraid. The galaxy didn't yet understand what humanity had brought to the ancient dance of warfare. Fear had never been the enemy. It had been waiting for the right species to make it sing. And that species knew, in their bones and blood and screaming neurons, what it meant to be terrified and keep fighting anyway.